Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today is the day we're going to add the soil to my garden beds. Now this will be video number 31 on my Beginning Gardener series. The last video that I did showed you how I put those beds together and why I added the sticks at the bottom of them, and I'll link that above so you can watch that. Now it's time to add the soil. Now I did order some garden soil in, and it's going to be quite different than the soil that I've used in the past. In the past I've used peat moss, compost, and vermiculite, and that has worked really well. But I did a soil test for the first time this year. I'll link another video that shows you when I did that soil test and how I did it. And the results were quite surprising, and it's kind of redone my thinking about the soil that I put in my raised beds. So let's go show you the soil that I got. Let's get that soil put in the beds, and then we'll go over the soil test and talk about why I made the change. So just for reference, so you can kind of see what it looks like. This is what the soil in my garden beds right now looks like. As I said, this is peat, compost, and vermiculite. Now, I use the vermiculite to retain water. It also holds nutrients and releases both the nutrients and the water slowly. The peat holds water, and the compost adds the nutrients. So it has worked pretty well for me. I have had a few issues, and then the soil test, as I said, was quite surprising. We'll go over that in a minute. So here's the soil that I ordered. There's about 3 cubic yards of soil right here. 2 of them are a garden blend. 1 of them is just an organic compost. And I did not have these tested before I ordered them because I've already done so many soil tests. I didn't want to pay for another one. But I will get this tested next year. So this soil is a mixture of screen topsoil, sand, and compost. And then I added, as I said, the extra load of compost to mix in with it. So let's get this loaded into the beds. It's going to take me a little while, doing it by myself with my wheelbarrow. And then we will talk about the soil test results and why I chose this blend. And we're going to talk about soil nutrients in just a little while. Well, it's been a few days and I actually got the soil moved. Now I over-ordered a little bit and gave some to my neighbor, but all the soil is in my garden beds, and let's show you what it looks like and then we'll talk about my soil tests. Now I did just get caught in a downpour of rain, so this was watered in just a little bit. I think we got about 1/10 of an inch. I have a rain gauge and it's at 1/10 of an inch. So we'll need to water these again. I have not set up the irrigation. That'll be in another video. And this is a bed that we're going to talk about in a different video. This is just using some, the excess soil and excess straw that I had. But each one of these beds is filled. Now it is definitely a different soil than I have. Than I have in this bed. This is all compost and peat. And this is sand, topsoil, and compost. Now these are my soil tests, and I'll just show them on screen for you. I got 3 different tests, and they were done at the USU Soil Labs. And we're going to go over the garden one first, because it was very interesting. So my pH was 7.3, which was pretty good considering the other areas that I tested. But those beds primarily have peat and compost in them, and that would lower the pH just a little bit. The next thing that I kind of suspected had happened is the salinity is pretty high. They suggested that I leach the salts out of the soil. I figured that the salinity is coming out of the bagged compost that I used. And I've heard that has been an issue with other people, so salinity was not that much of a surprise. The phosphorus and potassium are high. The phosphorus is very high, and I kind of suspected that, but I had been adding all-purpose fertilizers anyway, and I need to stop. The only fertilizer that I should be adding from now on is nitrogen in these beds. The phosphorus and the potassium is too high. Now, phosphorus and potassium can actually get high enough to be toxic. I don't think this is the case. I haven't seen any issues that show potassium or phosphorus toxicity, but I just need to stop using those. The only way to get rid of phosphorus out of the soil is for the plants to use it up. So it's going to take a while before I can add any fertilizers with phosphorus or potassium in it. All of the rest of them look pretty normal. The nitrates, zinc, copper, manganese, and sulfur. Well, the sulfur they don't measure, and they don't measure the nitrates because those get leached out of the soil very quickly and off-gas into the air, so those levels change very quickly. But the one that is very interesting is the iron. And if you notice, the iron levels are high. And it's the only soil test that I had that showed the iron levels are high. I talked to our extension service and asked him if it's possibly the vermiculite, because vermiculite does have some iron in it. And as it breaks down, I'm wondering if that has raised the levels of iron in the soil. And he said he didn't know. He didn't know if that's what caused the iron levels to be higher, but it certainly could have been a possibility. But he did also note that because the soil is tending towards alkaline, that the iron in the soil is not going to be readily available to the plants anyway, so the high levels are not something that I should need to worry about that much. Now, I definitely don't need to go add more iron to the soil, so I won't be doing that. So that's the test results for my garden beds. Now, I decided that I wanted to try a different type of soil. Now, I don't know if everybody's heard, in Britain they've had new laws enacted that are requiring everybody, including imported plants, to go peat-free. They're working to save their peat bogs, and so they've made that law that says everything has to be peat-free in the garden and landscape industries. So I decided to see if I could try some soils in my garden beds that would also be peat-free. You know, not that the United States is leaning towards being peat-free, it's just that I wanted to try it out and see what the differences are. So that's why I decided to go with the soil mix that I did, that has the topsoil and the compost and the sand. So I will test these new garden beds next spring. I suspect because of the compositions of the soil in Utah and the fact that they added compost, that those soils will be high in phosphorus and potassium. So I'm just going to treat them the way I treat the rest of the beds and only use nitrogen in them. So let's look at the results for the other areas of my yard. So the next one is my food forest area, the fruit trees. Now this area does not have native soil. I brought in a load of topsoil that is a lot like the garden blend here, minus the compost. If you look at the test results, it says it's a sandy loam. Our native soils are heavy clay with a lot of rock, and so sandy loam is a good soil to have. But the layer is only about 8 inches deep. Below that is the clay. The pH of that soil is 7.6. The phosphorus was high and the potassium is adequate, so that's great. The rest of it looks really good, and as I said before, they don't measure the nitrogen or sulfur. So let's look at the front yard. So the next one in the front yard, the pH is the same, which is not a surprise, it's 7.6. And in my front yard, it is closer to the native soil, but the person who owned the house before I did brought in a lot of sandy topsoil. So I actually have 3 layers to my soil in the areas where I've amended it. The top layer is usually kind of a compost mulch that's been broken down. The next layer is that sandy topsoil that the previous homeowner brought in. And then below that is the native soil, which is the heavy clay with the rock in it. So it's a sandy loam, just like the backyard, because of that sand in the topsoil that was there, the previous owner's topsoil. Salinity is normal. It's a tiny bit lower than the food forest area. Phosphorus is very high, as was the food forest. Potassium is adequate, and everything else is adequate. So it looks pretty good. So I definitely do not need to be using phosphorus or potassium in my soil beds when I fertilize. I just need to be using nitrogen. Now, a lot of the plants that I planted, including the fruit trees and all of the plants in my front yard, really actually don't need fertilizer. The mulch that I brings in provides all of the fertilizer that they'll need. They're not heavy feeders, but in my garden beds, I'm going to be adding nitrogen. Now, there are several different ways I could go about this. I could just get lawn fertilizer minus the weed killer, obviously. So either the ammonium sulfate or the urea, and I could apply that if I would like. Or I could use blood meal. Blood meal is an excellent source of organic nitrogen, and I think that's what I'm going to be doing. Now, another thing that I can add is worm castings, and I think those worm castings I'm just going to add a little bit because those do have phosphorus and potassium in it, but I'm not going to add enough to cause any problems with that. So that is it. It really helps to test your soil to see what you have so you're not adding unnecessary fertilizers, and so you don't accidentally push some of those levels into the toxic levels. So hopefully this video has been helpful to you. If it has been helpful, I hope you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.